Thousands of years ago, seagoing people from Southeast Asia colonized the Pacific Islands. Coming in successive waves, using huge twin-hulled canoes, this maritime civilization gradually spread. It was the largest human exodus which is known to have occurred during the migrations era, and one of the most remarkable exploits in the history of humankind. Without maps, sextants, or compasses, these navigators learned over generations to follow the star's course, to recognize the winds and currents, to interpret the cloud shapes and the movement of the waves. The populating of the Pacific is thought to have begun approximately 70,000 years ago, with Australian Aborigines descended from those who crossed from the Indo-Malaysian peninsula. Then came the Papuans, Melanesians who arrived in Papua New Guinea approximately 35,000 years ago, then went on to the Solomon Islands, to Vanuatu, and to Fiji, ending their travels in New Caledonia around 3,500 or 4,000 BC. A second migratory wave began in southern China, moved to the Samoa Islands and the Tonga region. Later, a star-shaped migratory movement is thought to have reached the Marquesas Islands, the Society Islands, Hawaii, and Easter Island, sometimes during our era. The course of this migration ended in New Zealand around 850 AD. To the north, other populations ethnically close to Polynesians invaded the Micronesian islands. It was in fact a Frenchman, Admiral Dumont d'Urville, who defined the nomenclature of the three principal ethnic groups in the southern Pacific. He coined such terms as Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia. By resorting to Greek, he defined the world of atolls, micro in Greek meaning small, and nesos, islands. Polynesia, or the world of many islands, because there are many islands in Polynesia. And lastly, Melanesia, for which he refers to a physical anthropological criterion. The inhabitants are black, so he employs the Greek term melas, black, to denote the Melanesians. The deep-sea twin-hulled canoe was probably the most important artifact of the Pacific culture. Operated by sails made of pandanus leaves woven together and a huge paddle helm, these canoes were sometimes over 30 meters long and could carry approximately 60 passengers with food for several weeks. On top of the tree saplings and the animals, such as pigs and dogs, that the first settlers wanted to bring to the new islands, they also brought fresh and dried food, coconuts, sweet potatoes, taros, bananas, breadfruit, and fish. Some of the bigger canoes even had ovens that could cook several pigs at the same time. Drinking water was kept in gourds, and coconuts worked wonders to quench the crew's thirst. The huge double canoes, ancestors of our catamaran, have long disappeared. Today, canoes are made of fiberglass, and motorboats have largely taken the place of the small canoes which were carved out of tree trunks. In reaction, no doubt, to the Occidental model, which superseded the structure of the ancient traditional society, more and more Polynesians are attempting to return to roots which they sometimes idealize. This search for cultural identity is present not only in Tahiti, but everywhere in Polynesia, in the Cook Islands, in the Tonga Islands, the Samoa Islands, even in Hawaii. For many, this quest is satisfied in the revival of the canoe, the symbol of a people entirely orientated towards the element of their preference, the ocean which surrounds and feeds them. Karim Kowan is one of the generation which wants to reconnect with its roots. This passion for his cultural origins even pushed him to build his own double canoe, a replica of the first navigators' boats. It took me a year and a half to build this canoe. It's 14 meters long. I intend to build another one in New Zealand. The tree trunks have already been cut. What I need now is the hardest part, the financing. In the old days, it was more a question of finding helping hands, and then the tree trunks. That's the difference between then and now. Our ancestors made the canoes without money. But today, at the dawn of the 21st century, my generation needs to find money to try to recreate what our ancestors did.
Donc c'est ça la grande différence.
In spite of many misadventures, the love for the ocean is perhaps as strong today as it ever was, and the canoe still represents an essential element of local daily life. Even if it is no longer used for fishing or transportation, it's through contests that the canoe is preserved as a cultural paradigm. There are thousands like Karim who practice every day on the lagoon, perfecting their craft in the hope of saving a few seconds and winning against the eternal rival, the ocean. The main speed and endurance races come with the Heyva, the July festivities. The whole nation stands behind the champions, especially during the popular annual endurance race between the islands of Tahiti and Moorea.
On est descendants de familles de navigateurs.
We descend from
Les
navigators.
personnages qui m'ont marqué.
The people in my family who impressed me most were my uncle Charlie Cowan, who was a fisherman hunter and a boxer,
Et aussi mon oncle.
and my uncle, Francis Cowan.
Lorsque j'étais jeune,
When I was young, I heard my uncle telling my father about his plan to cross an ocean.
Projet de faire une traversée. Tout ce que je me
All I
souviens,
can
c'est
remember
que
them mentioning
j'avais
is
entendu le
Kon-Tiki
nom de Kon-Tiki
and
et
Eric de Bishop. Karim's uncle, Francis Cowan, and Eric de Bishop were among the originators of the revival of Tahitian culture. In the 1950s, before the work of archaeologists had convinced the world of the Asian origins of the Polynesians, there was a great deal of controversy on the subject. The thesis propounding the American origins was supported and popularized by Thor Heyerdahl, who in 1947, on board the Kon-Tiki raft, sailed to the Tuamotu Islands from Peru to illustrate his theory. We discussed the Kon-Tiki affair, which was the affair of the century. For us, Thor Heyerdahl's theory went in the same direction as the official theories of the time, and we were greatly opposed to them. We wanted to demonstrate our theory that the Polynesians were capable of the same feats of navigation by constructing the same type of craft to reach South America. In 1956, Francis Cowan and Eric de Bishop left Papeete on board the raft Tahiti Nui. On their 166th day at sea, they were shipwrecked off the coast of Chile. With the experience I acquired on board the raft, I decided to build a 20-meter double canoe, entirely in the Polynesian style, and to set off from Tahiti for New Zealand. In 1985, they sailed from Papeete to Raiatea, the Cook Islands, and on to New Zealand. It was a great boost to our cultural revival and helped us in our present task of retracing our ancestors' footsteps. The first circumnavigators made contact with the Polynesian societies in the late 18th century. Wallis in 1767 and Bougainville in 1768. But the first real scientific explorations were headed by Captain James Cook in 1769, 1773, and 1777. Accompanied by artists and scientists, Cook, the first modern-day explorer, collected geographical and ethnographic data about the Pacific Islands by systematically describing, drawing, or mapping every place or object encountered. For Cook, the Pacific presented the paradox of being the last region of the world unknown to Europeans and the first to be scientifically studied. This is a map which was drawn by James Cook in 1769. Here you can see Venus Point and Matavai Bay, where he anchored. The myth that Polynesia exerted over the Occidental world was fantastic. What most impressed Bougainville in his travel journals was how accessible the Tahitian women were. They had no notion of sin. They gave themselves to the sailors who, after being at sea for up to 5 or 6 months, craved the company of women. All this, according to Bougainville, was accomplished on an amicable, albeit licentious, mode of exchange. Transcribed in Paris, this journal popularized the mystique of Tahitian culture and the fantasy of Tahitian women. Bougainville interpreted the warm Tahitian welcome as the confirmation of Rousseau's theories. Man is good only in the primitive state. This myth of Polynesian paradise would cross the centuries, impressing itself upon the Occidental mind for generations. Many artists, writers, or adventurers made Tahiti the goal of a journey with no return. Some said the contact was fatal. Others thought the contrary. The Polynesians have the ability of integrating foreign contributions. Unfortunately, Polynesia was also affected by the diseases the circumnavigators brought, and by the arrival of the whalers and the missionaries. Over time, the societies began to lose their demographic structure. New Zealand counted 200,000 inhabitants at the time of Cook's arrival. By the year 1900, there were only 50,000 left. When the first Americans landed in the Marquesas, there were over 35,000 inhabitants. By 1900, there were only 2,000 left. The impact that could be felt in the social, political, economical, and cultural structures all derived from the demographic decline. In the second half of the 20th century, Polynesian culture began to revive. Many inhabitants experience, through their search for a cultural identity, a certain feeling of well-being, a harmony with tradition. This revival continues today in many forms, including dance, singing, canoeing, in the practice of traditional medicine, and tattooing. In a way, the initial contact wasn't fatal, but it created a break. Today, the old Polynesia subsists by the efforts to reclaim it. The art of tattooing was noted by explorers in the 18th century. Cook was the first in 1769 to transcribe the Polynesian word to form the English word, tattoo. The color they use is a smoky black, obtained from the combustion of a sort of nut oil. The instrument they use is made of very flat, thin bones and shells. One end has carved teeth and is fixed to a pole. First, they dip the teeth in the black liquid. Then, with short, firm taps, they puncture the skin's surface with the teeth, drawing a small amount of blood. The part that has been marked remains painful for several days until healed. Women and men alike wear circles and crescents on their legs and arms. The drawings differ greatly, depending entirely on the individual's tastes and fancy. They wear them proudly, and both men and women enjoy showing them off.
Today, tattoos are making a big comeback.
Young people especially feel drawn to them. For some Polynesians, Maori, tattooing was a tradition. Some young people today have adapted tattoos inspired by those their grandparents or other members of their families had. This canoe is from Society Island. This one is from Hokulea, from Hawaii. This one is from Rurutu. Here, over on this side, is a canoe from the Marquesas Islands. Well before the arrival of the white man, the double canoe helped commercial exchanges between Micronesians, Melanesians, and Polynesians. Tradition has it that a population originating in the Tonga region landed sometimes in the 16th or 17th century in New Caledonia, on l'Île des Pins, Pine Island. These newcomers mixed with the Melanesian population and became the inhabitants of l'Île des Pins, or the Canoes in the Kanak language. Oddly enough, it is no longer in Tahiti but in New Caledonia on the Île des Pins, where one finds the best preserved tradition of small Polynesian outrigger canoes. We owe the survival of this Polynesian craft to the society structure of the Canoes, as well as to the development of tourism in the past years. Joseph Duepere, a carpenter, devotes much of his time to making dugout canoes out of tree trunks. What kind of tree is this, Joseph? It's a pine called the kauri pine. Did the ancestors use this kind of wood? Yes, the ancestors used this pine wood because they made canoes that were 11 or 12 meters long. That's why they used the kauri pines, because they were real high. Why did you want to make these canoes? Oh, about 10 years ago, we didn't have any canoes left. Same as in Tahiti. There were only 4 or 5 left, so the young had the idea of building new ones. A sort of renaissance. I hope we'll succeed in reviving the tradition too. It's picking up slowly. When I compare what's been accomplished here on l'Île des Pins with what we've managed in Tahiti, you've come a lot further. We don't have that in Tahiti anymore. He said he likes this one because the elders used to pick trees with curves. Curves bring strength to the wood and to the canoe. We always wait for the full moon to cut the trees. How about you? We wait for the moon to go down, when the sap goes down into the roots, drying the tree out. This week we'll be cutting tender wood, like pine. Even the outriggers will need to be cut this week.
Back home in Polynesia, we use the uru tree, but we wait for the sap to rise into the trunk before we cut it down. I have seen how they dig out logs. I've even done it myself. I built my own canoe. I've also helped other people build canoes. What amazes me is how they come to decisions here. If someone wants a canoe, the whole tribe helps choose the tree, and they all cut it down. They do things collectively. You see that a lot in the Pacific, at least in Polynesia.
Du moins en Polynésie.
The Kunyes still use outrigger canoes to transport tree trunks from surrounding isles. This trunk will be brought to Joseph Duipere's village, where it will be carved into its final shape. The way Joseph works is wonderful, because he isn't paid for it. He does it with his heart and soul. In exchange for building a canoe, the family gives him fish, buys him the things he needs, like gas or yams. They feed him in a way. Kids start sailing when they're 7 or 8, so they start real early.
À utiliser la perche avec le bois. La patate là, blanche. Entre celle qui est ici et puis celle qui est là-bas devant. Tu vois, Tito,
You see, Tito, I have a double canoe in Tahiti, but it's not the same technique as here. In Tahiti, you sail on the ocean. Here, it's much harder because you have to keep careful watch for the coral reefs.
Les yeux devant et surtout sur le vent, quoi. Et surtout faire attention aux patates, quoi, aux coraux.
The customs, memory of and respect for the past is still very vivid on Île des Pins, as it is all over Melanesia. The traditional Kuni society is based on landowner clans and fisherman clans. The latter are the only ones traditionally allowed to fish for turtles and mekua fish. Joseph and other members of the Duepere fishing clan own a part of the sea that only they can exploit, a bit like having their own parcel of the sea. L'Île des Pins has 8 tribes. Hilarion Vendigu is the representative of the oldest clan and is presently the Grand Chef. Work was based on 2 principles, the principle of land and the principle of sea. The land belonged to the clans who cultivated the land, and the sea belonged to those who fished. In ancient times, the yam was of utmost importance. One might say it was a means of bonding, of agreement, of solidarity and support in the community. For the big ceremonies, it's always the yam. Yam is like fish. It's a custom. Fish without yam just doesn't make it. Fish has to be there and yam beside it.
The fruit of the earth never went without the products of the sea. In ancient times, you would always see a pile of yams next to a pile of mekua fish. If it wasn't the mekua season, you would have turtles. If it was neither the season for mekuas nor turtles, you would have mullet. But the two elements were inseparable. In the old days, it was yam and fish, fish and yam. So during the mekua season, the fishing clans bring the first catch ashore, and the grand chef calls the clans of the land and gives them their share. This tradition of sharing is deeply embedded in the Kunis culture. Each one has a part to play, a role, and fishing is, in a way, the guarantee of the stability of the group. Here at 3 meters deep, you can see amazingly big fish. I can see that there are lots of fish here, and that they've left the fish time to reproduce and for nature to replenish itself. Back in Polynesia, everything's commercial. The little fish land straight in the frying pan. They're sold by the side of the road. The double canoe was first revived in Hawaii in the 60s, when the academics and researchers there were alarmed by the disappearance of their original maritime culture. Under the influence of Ben Finney and the Polynesian Voyaging Society, they reproduced the large double canoes built by the first Polynesians and researched the ancient navigation techniques. This Polynesian revival is at the origin of the large double canoe, Okulea.
La Navigación tradicional.
Traditional maritime navigation with stars had disappeared here in Hawaii and even in Tahiti. Nearly everywhere in Polynesia it was But in Micronesia, in the small atolls, people had conserved traditional navigational skills. When we first set out on our canoe Okulea, we needed a navigator for the stretch between Hawaii and Tahiti. We chose a Micronesian, Mau Pialug, from Satawal, who became the Polynesians' guru and navigation teacher. They learned from their Micronesian cousins what their ancestors knew thousands of years ago.
Yeah, Mau Pialug has been a teacher to many of us here in these islands in one way or another. Yeah, he's the father. He's the father. We still need to acknowledge him. We still ask him, you know. And like he's told us, he says, "You never navigator until I die. I always have more secrets than you."
In 1975 and 76, there was only one navigator left who could read the stars, the natural elements, the currents, the clouds, the birds. Now, 20 years later, there are about 30 of us.
Mao, as far as I'm concerned, would always be number one because he's the man and he's the master and all of that.
The large double canoes with which the Polynesians were able to colonize the Pacific had long disappeared. It was necessary to start afresh, using the last European explorers' testimonials, and mainly James Cook's, who left descriptions and drawings of the boats.
Of 25 feet and upwards, of whatever sort, occasionally carry sails. The traveling vai is always double and furnished with a small neat house about 5 or 6 feet broad and 6 or 7 feet long, which is flattened upon the forepart of the convenience of the principal people who fit in them by day and sleep in them at night.
It's an axe like the one we saw with Clay on Big Island.
This is an adze, type of adze that was used by our ancestors many years ago to make canoes. As you know, as you can see, the stone here comes from an adze pit on the mountain of Mauna Kea, a place called Keanakoi. This specific stone was used to make the adze and shaped to make the canoes. All this is carved by adze, everything.
The researchers also studied drawings of sails on petroglyphs found in Hawaii.
This picture is really pretty unique. It kind of shows how the panels were made, you see? This line probably represents a panel that was made, and traditionally that's how it was made. It wasn't made, the full sail wasn't woven in one big piece. So in case you had any kind of a breakage in the panel, you just take off that one strip and replace it with that. Instead of having a full
length of
full sail, and you have a hole in the middle of it, you got to change the whole thing. This way, if for some reason under really heavy windy conditions, these 3 panels collapse on you, just take those 3 panels out, put the other panels in, and you go back and repair it. See?
What time you think, in time, this petroglyph was made by our ancestors?
I don't really know the time, when it was made. I do know, just through talking to some of the old people, that this was before the coming of the white man, yeah.
Such as Wallis, Bougainville, James Cook, and all those guys.
Yeah. So, and we don't really know the age of the whole thing, but what we look at is what they utilized back in those times and how effective it was for them. And by us doing the experiments and using the same type of sail, how much it benefits us, in the culture today.
It all started in 1965 with Ben Finney. In 1976, he went on his first journey to Tahiti. When the Okulea arrived in Tahiti, I was 16 or 17 years old. It really impressed me. When I saw the boat sailing towards my home island, it grabbed me. My soul, my body, my heart, it was love at first sight. When they arrived in the distance, it was as though our ancestors were revived from the past. There were over 4,000 or 5,000 people to greet the Okulea. It was a truly moving and unique event. It was like a rebirth. The general conscience that our ancestors used similar canoes. It was fantastic. The Okulea was the catalyst of the cultural revival, but many more double-hulled canoes have been built since then. The Cook Islands, Tahiti, and New Zealand all now possess their own canoes. Hawaii now owns 3, including the Makali, owned by Clay Bertelmann, who sailed on the Okulea.
Makali was a dream that we had for many years to build a canoe for this island, island of Hawaii. The dream became a reality in February of 1995 when we sailed from this island, from Hawaii to Tahiti and to the Marquesas and back.
In the past years, one has been able to see replicas of the traditional double canoes sailing all over the Polynesian Triangle. Traveling the oceans over thousands of miles, these canoes have helped to establish such gatherings as those which took place on the Cook Islands in 1992, or in 1995 at Tapu Tapuatea in Raiatea in French Polynesia. Symbols of newly recovered Polynesian unity, these gatherings are always held in highly symbolical places. Tapu Tapuatea was known for its alignment with the stars. The position of the constellations from there clearly indicates the way to Hawaii and New Zealand. Thousands of miles away from there, north of the Triangle, Hawaiians have a similar location which they call the Navigator's Table. Before setting off for an ocean voyage, Clay Bertelmann and the Makali's crew meet there.
You see this? This stone, what does it look like to you?
It looks like the face of Rapa Nui statue.
The statue of Rapa Nui, yeah. It was really neat is that you take the stone that is lying, that's back there,
Yeah.
and you line this up, the position of the sun, it gives you the direction to Rapa Nui. But you can see the nose, the mouth, yeah. If you look at this stone facing Rapa Nui, that stone and this stone here, gives you kind of an angle to Marquesas, you know. This stone here gives you an idea of where Tahiti is. The Rapa Nui stone, that stone there, that stone gives you an idea, it looks like a triangle. One being Aotearoa, Samoa.
La relation qu'on a, Clay et moi-même, c'est que...
The relation Clay and I have is that about 700 years ago, our great-great-great-grandfathers were brothers.
Des frères. Et ils sont partis des Marquises pour...
They left the Marquesas Islands to come to Hawaii, leaving the prints of the past there behind us, in the place called the Navigator's Table. All the stones behind me have a history and were put there by our parents. Today, we are trying to understand our past. We're bonded by about 700 years of common history, as cousins by blood. We were predestined to do what we're doing today in the field of navigation and navigation using the stars.
That the wind is probably going to go down.
A new generation of navigators has taken over from Mao Pialug. Nainoa Thompson can be considered as his spiritual son. In 1976, still an ordinary crew member, he started getting interested in navigation and in the stars. For years, Nainoa observed the sky and was taught by his master, who came from Micronesia to teach him his secrets. Nainoa has now navigated some 20 years on the Hokulea and has traveled over 50,000 kilometers, piloting as did his ancestors by consulting the stars. Nainoa is of the second generation of navigators. Karim, Dennis, and Shad are all his pupils.
Probably one of the first things that you learn is the star compass. This bird, you always think of yourself, the canoe, as being a bird, and you always look at it that way, so that the outstretched wings of your canoe, that you can always orientate yourself like a bird with its wings outstretched, and you always know where you are.
But then once we got that, then we transfer in that to the canoe itself, and looking at the canoe, where these houses would be located on the canoe, then filling in with what celestial bodies we can use, we would be looking for, right?
Do you see these little signs? They tell me our position, 11.50 degrees. There are 7 such points all down the canoe. When we navigate according to the horizon, we divide the 4 cardinal points into 32 points.
Yeah, and we're just going to distribute the weight. It's going to self-sail. Try and get the self-sail up into the wind. Too low. So every time when you bring them down this way, what happens is it's hitting the mast step. Yeah? Oh, the bottom. The bottom mast step. So when it comes down like this, it kind of pushes itself out to one side. Yeah, off to one side or out of the away from the mast. Okay, Malia, you can bring in that. Oh, Gora. No, you get rotors right there. Yeah, take that off. Bring it out.
Not a lot of wind, but I mean, there's wind out there.
Yeah. Looks steady, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, you can kind of see underneath.
Clouds too.
Yeah, and you can kind of see underneath the clouds. You know.
Yeah.
Does it look like this change in weather?
To navigate during the day, the references are the sun, the currents, the birds, and the ocean's swell. Those are the main reference points, the first signs. The swell is extremely important, how it hits the canoe. Right now, we're sailing according to the wind and the swell. The swell is coming from behind, a bit askew, and the wind is coming from the east. We're going up a bit like this.
The only problem is that one rope stays here already. Oh, it can though. Think it's surrounded. Yeah, so what you gotta do is Aloha! Aloha, Pu'umai! You really want to get to the tent now? You really want to? Okay.
The arrival of Hokulea on a Polynesian island is always an event, celebrated accordingly. These welcome ceremonies, supposedly loyal renderings of the past, always start with the gift from the crew of a rock, symbolizing the renewed unity of the Polynesian ensemble.
Pourtant, si les Hawaïens ont bien avancé dans la compréhension de la navigation traditionnelle aux étoiles, au courant et au vent, il reste encore bien des énigmes. Aujourd'hui, les chercheurs essaient de comprendre comment les anciens, sans rien connaître de la géographie du Pacifique, pouvaient entreprendre pendant des mois sur des milliers de kilomètres leur longue migration et atteindre les minuscules îles et îlots perdus dans l'immensité du Pacifique. Instinct, magnétisme, le mystère demeure. Il en est peut-être mieux ainsi pour la beauté du mythe des premiers navigateurs, maîtres de l'océan.